think about these freedoms. So in that sense, it was for me an occasion to renew a discussion we already had before.
And you also see the impact also in Rotterdam that sort of the dialogue sort of stopped now.
Well, I mean, there is still, of course, an ongoing discussion, and Rotterdam doesn't stop breathing after Tariq has left. But I
not
mean,
breathing, but there was a very harsh discussion, of course, during the time that Tariq Ramadan was there, because people.
Yeah, but it's still there because it's not his presence there, but I mean, it is a translation of social realities that are changing. Now, half of Rotterdam, like half of Amsterdam, or half of Marseille, or half of Stuttgart, or half of Birmingham, are migrant families living there. That's, of course, a huge change. I think we shouldn't, that's one point I would see somewhat different. We can't see the past of a country like the Netherlands, you know, as being very homogeneous and now suddenly changing by migration. We have a long history of migration. The one thing is, if you compare Europe and America, that America knows its own immigration history and Europe doesn't. But you know, the level of immigration, for example, around the turn of the last century, you know, 1920s century, for example, there was massive immigration in France. Half of Marseille, no, not half, but 1/3 of Marseille were Italian and other migrants already at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. Amsterdam in the 17th century, half of it were immigrants. The population of Amsterdam. So, I mean, we have a much longer history of immigration, and one of the things that I would think is part of the search for a new citizenship would be, you know, teaching immigration history. Not to please people or to make a gesture, but to have a truthful idea of your own history, to understand that Dutch history is woven into a larger narrative.
And what's the impact of knowing that you will be less defensive towards new immigration? Because knowing is part of your history?
No,
or why is it so?
No, because it's a truthful, more truthful idea of your own history. Simply to understand how you became what you are. So in Arnhem here, we have the Openluchtmuseum, and they are thinking about it, you know, that's a museum where they have a sort of depiction of Dutch history, and they are thinking about weaving into that history a story of immigration that wasn't told there. I think that's much better than to say, you know, we have a separate museum for immigration history, for example, but to weave the idea of immigration into the way you look at your own past. So that's one thing.
And that's worthwhile in itself, because then you have a more whole view of your history and the society you are and your identity.
Because that is one of the huge chances of this whole debate, is that it confronts as a society what is so important to know about your own history. If people are telling, for example, and that is of course the huge embarrassment, they were telling to migrants that came, you have to know something about the Constitution. And then of course the question came back, what do you know about this Constitution yourself? Why is it so important? And then of course you discover that we haven't been thinking about our Constitution for a long time. But you cannot ask people who recently came to the Netherlands to know more about this society than the people who were already there. So it forces you into a reflection about what is so fundamental about your Constitution. What is you should know as a citizen of the history of the society you're part of. But then, of course, you are confronted with a lot of difficult questions about colonial history. And then it all, you know, starts, and that is what you can see in Britain, in France, in the Netherlands, and that is a very productive uncertainty that arises from this whole discussion.
But that can give you a more whole view and a more perspective also on your own identity. Yeah. At the same time, you see this discussion in the Netherlands and on sort of practical negotiations. People have problems with the fact that people are not shaking hands, or that a Muslim woman doesn't want to be treated by a male doctor. That are the sort of basic consequences. For example, my mother focuses with when she has to go to the doctor or talk to someone in the bus or whatever. That are the differences that people are really seeing in society and discussing about.
Yes, I think that just to add something to what you are saying, because I really think that part of the solution in the second part of our discussion will be this, to know our history. Still, you are completely right. Migrations are part of the European history. What we are talking about now, which is quite new, is the type of migrants that are coming in, because this is new. And mainly, even yesterday they were Italian, Portuguese, Spanish within Europe.